Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rockstars. And if you're like most of my listeners, you're either a CEO or a COO, or maybe you run a venture capital fund or private equity fund, whatever it may be, optimizing your health and your performance is crucial. It's vital to being able to do your job. Without health, without your performance, you have no performance at work. There's no such thing. And that's why today's guest is so fascinating, because the business that he's scaling very rapidly, by the way, with backing from some of the top VCs in the country, is all about unlocking your human performance. And he's going to talk about how that product works. And then he's going to talk about how he's building the business that is unlocking human performance. So my guest today is Will Ahmed, and Will is the founder, the CEO of Whoop, probably the coolest name ever, WHOOP. Whoop. I love it. And Will started the business pretty much right out of school. He was a top athlete in squash at Harvard. And after that, spent some time thinking about this concept, and then I'll let him pick up the story. So with all that, Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
I am thrilled. So why don't we start just at the 30,000 foot level, tell people kind of how you got here. So you graduate college, You're a top squash player, captain of the team. Now you're leading a venture funded data science company on performance. Fill in the missing gap for a minute, will you?
Yeah. So just quickly, our mission at Whoop is really to unlock human performance. So we believe every individual has an inner potential that you can tap into if you better understand their bodies and their behaviors. And we've built technology across hardware and software and analytics, really designed to understand, again, the human body. Whoop measures things like the strain of workouts, the strain of your day. It measures how recovered you are, and it measures how well you're sleeping. And that provides a dashboard to individuals and teams to perform at a higher level. And I provide that context because I was always into sports and exercise growing up, and I was fortunate, as you mentioned, to play squash at Harvard, and I was training as a competitive athlete, but I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing to my body while I was training. I was someone who used to overtrain, where you get like fitter and fitter and fitter, and then all of a sudden you fall off a cliff.
Yep.
And lots of athletes overtrain. More athletes even get injured, misinterpret fitness peaks, don't necessarily understand the importance of recovery or sleep. And so for me, it was getting really interested in physiology. And I did a lot of physiology while I was a student at Harvard. I read something like 500 medical papers, and I wrote a paper.
I bet you
myself.
were fun at the beer bashes.
I had plenty of fun too at Harvard, which may have been part of the reason I overtrained, because you're just go.
Right.
But I read a bunch of medical papers, and I wrote a paper myself around how to understand the body, and that really became the business plan for starting Whoop. And so I founded Whoop my senior year at Harvard. So this would have been very early 2012, and I spent months trying to find the right people to work on the technology with me. And over time, I finally met John Capilupo, our chief technology officer. And John was studying some of the hardest math classes in the country. And as it turns out, his father's a professor of exercise physiology.
Perfect.
And so the two of us had a real overlap around physiology, and John had the technical chops to do some things from a sensing standpoint that hadn't been done before. And I had a vision to try to build a product for coaches and athletes and beyond. And so that was summer of 2012. We started working together, and
haven't stopped ever since. Or you certainly haven't slept since, other than when the device tells you need to sleep.
Yeah, I'm proud to say I'm a pretty good sleeper, because I wear a product 24/7 that teaches me to do that.
So let's talk about the product. Just for people that are listening, they're on their elliptical, they're driving a car, so they can't see it. But this is not Fitbit. This is a band that is really single purpose, which is to optimize your health and unlock your health. It's not giving you your Twitter feed. It's not calling Uber. It's not showing you who's calling on your phone. Is that right?
Yeah, well said. I think Whoop is great at all the things it does for also all the things it doesn't do.
Yeah,
And we're
right.
very focused on health and helping you understand your body. And as a result, we collect about 1,000 to 10,000 times as much data as an Apple Watch or a Fitbit in a given day.
Got it.
And that really allows us to be super accurate, and it allows us to deeply understand things like strain and recovery and sleep. And we measure those things much more accurately than anything else on the market.
When you describe it that way, it almost sounds more like a data company than a hardware company, right? The band is just a device to get the data.
And by the way, that's how we sell it. We offer Whoop as a $30 a month subscription,
Got it.
and the hardware actually is free. It comes with it. I'm
Got it.
wearing the
Yep.
sensor on my wrist for those viewing,
Yep.
and you can
So it's
see
kind of
it's just a very.
amortized into the cost of the subscription.
It's just completely included. Period.
Got it. Got it. Great. Okay. So now that we understand what the business is, let's just get people a scope. I won't ask you revenues or anything, but roughly how many people in the business?
Yeah, so Whoop today is about 110 people. We're primarily based in Boston. We've raised a little bit more than $100 million in capital to date, and we're continuing to grow quickly. So it's an exciting time.
You could just take the 100 million that you've raised, give each guy $1 million and go home and call it a day.
It sounds like that math makes sense, but in
doesn't
fact,
doesn't work that
it's
way.
not, it's not quite how we do it.
So let's talk now about the 100 people. So you've scaled from 2 or 3 co-founders to 100 people in 8 years, but I'm guessing the bulk of that hiring has probably been more recently.
Yeah, we've probably gone from 50 to 100 just in 2019, and maybe even 50 to 100 in like the back half of
Wow.
2019. So
So you've
we've
doubled
grown.
in size in the past year.
Yeah, definitely.
When you think about that original mission of unlocking human performance, how did you translate that into the DNA and the non-negotiable values that you wanted to hire people for beyond competencies, but just the DNA? Did you say we're only going to hire athletes, we're only going to hire people that put health first? How did you kind of think about connecting the business mission with the DNA?
Well, I'll tell you what I look for in every candidate, and I tell this to people too. What we look for at Whoop are people that have a high intensity, so they have a deep desire to further their knowledge in a particular discipline, and they have a high degree of humility.
Mm-hmm.
And high intensity, high humility. And the reason that's a powerful combination is it's also kind of a unique combination. More often, you find those things are inversely correlated. So people who are more intense tend to be less humble, or people that are more humble tend to be less intense. And what I've found in building an organization with people that are super intense but humble is that when you take 5 people and you put them in a room and each of them represents a department, which is often the case, in a small startup, there's a natural collision of ideas, right? So let's pretend you have a meeting to describe how data should get sent from a Whoop strap to an iPhone,
Yep.
right? Fairly simple sounding concept, actually quite a complex answer.
And there's a lot of
And
different ways to do it.
a lot of different ways to do it. So you've got, a hardware engineer, an iOS engineer, a product designer, a marketer, a designer, all in a room. And now they have to figure out how to do this. And there's this collision that happens in that meeting. And what you want is for that group to come up with the best idea for the company, not who came up with the idea.
Right.
And I
So
find
best idea wins.
yeah, and I find that's where people who are both in can recognize and work towards a solution that is best for the company. And I find in turn that helps create an idea meritocracy, because people realize that the best idea wins. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It doesn't matter if you're an intern or you're a VP of what. If you have the best idea at Whoop, it can be something that we do tomorrow.
Where did you learn this, Will? I mean, you went from graduating college to starting this business. It's not like you spent 10 years training under some great leaders of some
Sure. Yeah.
businesses or something. And it's clearly you've thought about it more than just repeating some book. So how'd you figure this out? Is
Well,
this
I
tied to
mean,
your
look,
sports background?
some of this is trial and error. In the process of growing from, you know, 2 or 3 people to 100, we've probably hired 150 people just over the course of 8 years. So you have some, you have people who've been members of the team for 7 years, and you have people who have churned out of the organization, whether they've left voluntarily or whether they've been fired. And so you learn along the way, okay, who's working best in this culture, who's working best with you and you as a leader, who's working best with other leaders in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to get stuck in this trap of putting up with people that are high intensity, high competency, and assholes effectively,
Yeah.
right? And that's an issue that I think every startup faces. And look, we've had those engineers before, we've had those designers before, where the work is amazing, and yet it is such a challenge working with them.
It's just not worth it, right?
I've just learned it's not worth it, because there are amazing people out there who you can work with.
So how do you have that discussion with them to give them the feedback that if this doesn't change, we're going to have to part ways? How long do you give it? How do you have those discussions? Or have you realized that you're kind of wasting your breath and the person's not going to change?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is from somewhat limited experience, but the two things that I've felt in my experience of building Whoop is, one, it's very hard to convince people to work harder. Either that's something that you inherently have or you don't. You can inspire people, but their work ethic, that's something I think that comes from within.
It's hardwired pretty early, yeah.
And the separate thing is, it's very hard to train someone to not be, arrogant or, rude, right? And so, so those are kind of two things that you try to screen for in the interview process. And by the way, references play a massive role in that. I think you can learn a lot about intensity and humility in the process of references.
Tell us how you do that. So listeners, most of them hate reference checking. Many of them skip it or don't give it its full due. What have you learned, Will, about how to do references to uncover those critical things? Humility, coachability, intensity. These are things that are hardwired. You can't teach or train them, right? You can teach them skills. So how do you uncover those in a reference check?
Well, as you know, probably from being a podcast host and everything else, like, the most interesting insights come from layers of questioning and depth. So it's not just the first question, it's the follow-up question, and then the follow-up question where you actually learn something. And references are 100% that, because you'll start by asking them, oh, talk about a challenging time with this individual or something like that. And then you want to just keep peeling back that onion until you learn something. I find that really probing about how an individual works with their teammate or works with their managers or works with their direct reports can do a good job getting at the humility piece. And I find that really understanding how the individual overcame an obstacle, whether it was a tight release date or whether it was a moment in time where it seemed like things weren't going to work, you can kind of get at intensity. And mind you, I'm not even really talking about just, are they like great at their job?
Yeah. That's not even competencies. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We're not really talking about competencies. I'm just talking about it's more of a cultural screening than anything else. And fortunately, I'm not surrounded by a lot of brilliant people who are, in many ways probably better than me at figuring out their competencies.
That's the easy part, so to speak. What about who does the references? You don't do the references for every person and every hire in the company. So how does that kind of work in terms of who's doing them?
Well, we have a VP of talent who's phenomenal, a guy named Rob Case. If I'm the hiring manager, I'm 100% doing the references. Mm-hmm. There's no question. However, if we're hiring a lead software engineer, then the hiring manager may be our VP of software, and then Mark, who's our VP of software, and Rob, who's our VP of talent. They'll tag team the different references. Maybe they'll have a strategy for what are we trying to learn from these references, and you go from there.
Have you incorporated any other unique elements into the hiring process that you found helpful? Some companies do online assessments, some do some kind of job audition, some do whiteboard sessions, anything, dinners, whatever.
I think it can vary a lot by, well, first of all, it can vary a lot by the role, right? If you're interviewing a product manager, have them walk through a whiteboarding session to design a feature. If you're interviewing an engineer, have them walk through a coding problem. Those are 100% things we do.
Yep.
I mean, I'll answer your question a little differently, which is that I think there's things that are underrated to look for, and I think there's things that are overrated to look for. The overrated things are, this person worked at a fill in the blank successful company. Okay, well, what role did they play in actually making it successful, right? This person went to, a great school.
Right.
Okay, I went to Harvard, so I know that there's plenty of people at Harvard I wouldn't want to work with, even though, I love school and there's plenty of smart people there.
Right.
So, that can often be a misleading tell. Another thing that's overrated is dinging a guy for being nervous. A guy or a man or a woman.
Because some people are just not great, confident interviewers, but they turn out to be amazing employees.
Totally. And on the flip side, there's people who are great at interviewing who are lousy at their jobs.
Sure.
I hate seeing jumpiness on a resume.
What do you mean jumpiness?
Someone who's worked somewhere for 12 months, 15 months, 12 months. It's like, I love seeing when someone's worked somewhere for 4 years and then 4 years.
Which these days is an unusual thing.
Well, especially out west. I think it's a little easier to find people in Boston. So Whoop is based in Boston. But on the West Coast, you find people who almost use vesting schedules, as a form of building an option portfolio.
Yeah. Right.
And you can't always blame them, because if there's going to be bad behavior at the board level, the investor level, and you don't know whether those options are worth anything anyway, right? You can't blame them. But bottom line is, at Whoop, we're looking for people who want to be committed to the cause and want to be here for a number of years, because every year that person's at Whoop, they have compounding knowledge of code bases, of design strategies, of our clients. Of
you
our
lose
culture.
so much institutional knowledge when they leave the company.
Totally. So I put a heavy weight on people who have showed loyalty throughout their careers. I think failure is one of those things that you also want to be mindful overreacting to. Judge the response, not the mistake.
Yep.
Right?
How they handle it, to where they learn from it, etc. So speaking of mistakes, tell us about one of the. If you could go back over these 8 years and do something differently with regard to the people part of the business. Maybe it was the worst hire you made, or some cultural decision you made, or some proclamation you made that you wish you could take back. You don't have to name names or anything, but what would you say, man, that like set us back 3 months, 6 months, a year, in terms of the people part of the business?
It's funny. I'm always wary with these questions because I'm so happy with where Whoop is today. And I really believe it's a butterfly effect. Like, you go back and you change one thing, everything could be completely different.
That's fair.
So I don't really have any regrets in building the business. Now I have things that I've learned from.
So give us a painful one, something that really at the time was tough.
Well, let's see. I think it's funny. The first person I fired in my whole life, I was probably 23 years old. This was a senior executive who we had brought on to oversee engineering, and I actually didn't really know much about the process for letting someone go.
Right.
And and so I didn't have, I sort of sat down to have this conversation with the person. I didn't have anyone else with me. I didn't have the sort of the paperwork that you should have, like, immediately during an event like that. And so I learned pretty quickly that's not how you do it.
Yeah. Never made that mistake again.
Never made that mistake again. Yeah, that's for sure. And in general, I think letting people go is really quite painful. But the thing that I'll say is, which is sort of the positive spin to it, is that the moment that a manager doesn't trust someone to do their job, it's no longer good for that person to be in the role.
Yeah. It's
Period.
unfair
Be-
actually for you to pretend
yes, it
otherwise. Yeah.
totally. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to the rest of the organization.
What have you learned about keeping the momentum going and keeping people optimistic and positive during the really tough times? You've had some amazing accomplishments. You've raised a good amount of money from top VCs. You've signed deals with some of the top sports leagues. You've got investors who are top athletes. So
Yeah.
plenty of great stuff to talk about, right? But over the course of 8 years, I'm sure not every day is filled with sunshine and those kind of press releases. So what have you learned about keeping the troops going and optimistic and hungry during the dark times?
One thing I've realized that I've done over the years, and I don't know how consciously I was doing this, but I would ultimately embody sort of the opposite feeling that the company had.
Mm-hmm.
So if everyone had a vibe of, wow, this is a really tough time, or wow, things aren't going well, or whatever, I'd be banging my fist on the table. Guys, we're turning this corner. There's a lot of amazing things happen. So and so just started using this thing. Our sales are growing over here. But you know, optimism, optimism, optimism. And uh, and when things have been going great, I've found myself being paranoid
Yeah.
and trying to look under corners of the office, trying to uncover things that maybe we're missing. Now I don't know, I don't know necessarily if that's a brilliant strategy or just one that seems to have helped us stay even keel. The advice that I give to a lot of founders and entrepreneurs who ask me how you deal with the good times and the bad times is I say that you want to try to stay pretty even keel.
It
And
almost
that's,
kind of regresses to the mean, right?
yeah, you want to be able to, you want to have a very steady hand, and you want and then you have to keep in mind, as a leader of an organization, a lot of people are looking at how you're responding to things
Right.
to understand how they need to
Yeah.
respond to
They're
things.
always watching, right? Even when you
Yes.
think they're not. One of my first investors, which is one of your investors, Foundry Group,
Yeah.
I think it was Brad Feld, and he would say at board meetings, "You're never as good as you think. You're never as bad as you think." Because
Totally.
there were times I would really beat myself up and be very down, frankly. And he and I both had bouts with depression and stuff that we've talked about on this podcast, and
Yeah.
so it's very easy to get down, and the troops get down, and it becomes kind of this cascading effect. And I think your strategy of kind of uh, being that balancing influence is a wise one.
Yeah, I think in general you want the organization to be pretty even keel throughout everything.
Yep.
And the other thing that is somewhat related is I find that you can't be repetitive enough. As an organization is growing, just repeating what's our mission,
Yeah.
repeating what's our goal this month,
Yeah.
repeating what are new things that are coming out,
The 10th time you
repeating,
say it is the first time they hear it, right?
yeah, because it may seem like it's an echo in your mind, but you got to break through. And
Yeah.
if you went around, I'd like to think if you went around Whoop and asked every single employee, what's the mission at Whoop? Every single person would say it's to unlock human performance.
Right, right. But if you then asked about what's our strategy, our priorities for this quarter, what are the 3 key metrics, you'd be kind of scared by what you heard, right? Wouldn't be as consistent.
Well, my point is I'm fighting that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I'm trying to make it my goal. Yeah, of course it's hard, but the
yeah,
goal is that you want to have everyone marching to the same beat of the drum, right?
yep, yep. Well, Will, I give you a ton of credit because this thing is scaling fast. And, when you started the business, people didn't even know what a Fitbit was. And now you're kind of turning this whole category upside down. So congratulations. How can people learn more about Whoop or get in touch?
You can find us at whoop.com, WHOOP.com. You can check us out on social media handles at Whoop. And you can find me at Will Ahmed, WILLAHMED.
I love it. And if you're ever in Boston, look up Will at Whoop. Will, thank you so much for making the time.
And we're hiring, so
And you're hiring
check
on top of that.
check out our careers page too. Thank you. No,
Thanks,
thanks for
Will.
having me on, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks.